Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. It's a pleasure to start today's session. It's good that people are typing their names and where you're from in chat. I can see some friends there. So it is a great pleasure to moderate this session. My name is Deborah Gutierrez. I work as a researcher at the University of the Azores and also as a PhD student at the University of the Algarve. I've been working in several projects with maritime spatial planning, marine protected areas, and also ocean governance and stakeholder engagement mainly. And it will be a pleasure to invite on the floor the colleague and friend, Dr. Will McIntosh. Will is a senior fellow at the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis at the University of California in Santa Barbara. He holds a PhD in ecology, evolution, and marine biology. And over the past 20 years, Dr. McIntosh has developed and implemented decision tools for maritime spatial planning, most notably the incredible tool SeaSketch, which is a platform used globally for collaborative decision making. His team at the University of California, Santa Barbara has been involved in MSP initiative across numerous beautiful and remote places on Earth, and including United States, Canada, Azores, Maldives, Bermuda, Barbuda, New Zealand, Indonesia, Fiji, Samoa, and much, much more. And now he's leading the ongoing ocean user survey in northeast of Brazil. So yeah, if you follow him on social media, you will be envy. Okay, it's my pleasure. What will the floor? It's totally yours.
Thanks so much, Deborah. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I appreciate everybody for being here and joining the webinar. So as Deborah said, I'm going to talk about SeaSketch, which is a platform that we've developed for a particular context, marine spatial planning. So I want to set that context first and then dive into some of the features of this tool. And very happy to take your questions afterward and go in any direction that suits you. Also, Deborah will put a link in the chat eventually that has my PowerPoint presentation with a bunch of different links that might be useful to you. So don't worry about jotting all those down. So here's the context. SeaSketch was developed for marine spatial planning, which basically, in a nutshell, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is zoning. That's how I like to think of it. Zoning for sustainable ocean uses and protection of vulnerable marine ecosystems. So the zones that people are creating, whether they're protected areas or others, have regulations with them that limit or altogether prohibit activities within those zones, right? And so because they have these regulations, they have the potential to really affect people's lives and livelihoods. And because of that, it's very important that these zones incorporate people's values and interests and ideas. Otherwise, they don't really stand a chance of working. So there are different ways that you can engage the public in this zoning process and marine spatial planning. And there's kind of this traditional way of doing things, which is kind of lousy, and then there are better ways. So this traditional way is like this one, which I saw happen in April of this year down in southern Brazil, where the federal government was presenting to a group of stakeholders this MPA plan that was pretty well thought out, actually, in lots of different ways, and had been in sort of a design phase for almost a decade. But this was the first time that these 1,200 or so stakeholders had heard about this plan. They showed up to this meeting to hear about it and basically protest. So they're holding up signs that say no to the MPA, respect our history. This meeting devolved into shouting and actually a group of people storming the stage. They had to be held back by armed police officers because they were so angry about this plan. And my friend Marinez down in the corner there, she sort of knew what was about to happen because she's been in this situation before. And after the meeting, she said to me, "Well, of course they hated this plan." And I like the way she put this. She said they couldn't see themselves in this plan. And this is not a unique situation. I don't mean to pick on Brazil. We've seen the same kind of thing happen back in California. This is actually how I started my career in marine planning. I was part of this MPA planning process in California where state mandated a network of marine protected areas, and they went about it kind of the old-fashioned way of getting a group of experts together, creating a plan, and then bringing that plan out to the public to get feedback. And at the beginning, in that sort of style, all of those plans were roundly rejected. It didn't matter the fact that those plans were actually pretty good plans from a science and policy perspective. Stakeholders hated them in a nutshell because they didn't create those plans themselves. So when we finally developed a process where stakeholders were responsible for creating the MPAs and meeting science and policy guidelines, and when we created a tool, back then it was called Marine Map, that stakeholders could use to author MPAs, then the process actually succeeded, and over a course of 6 years, 128 new MPAs were designed, all drawn by stakeholders, and then signed into law. So that's sort of where I came from when developing SeaSketch, trying to sort of mimic this public process and this participatory planning tool that allowed stakeholders to express their opinions, their ideas, and capture their values in such a way that they could be inserted into the planning process. So there are a couple. This is participatory mapping, right? And I'm guessing there are a lot of people on the call that have experience with this, but SeaSketch is used for participatory mapping in a couple different ways. One of them is through ocean use surveys, which is a really powerful means by which stakeholders can point to places on the map, indicate where they go and how they use and how they value ocean places. And in doing that, they contribute to data sets that describe the distribution of valued and used places in particularly coastal areas. And they fill what is traditionally a pretty huge data gap, information on human uses in the near shore. So they contribute to building a data set, but they also have an experience that is very powerful and leads to buy-in, basically, in the process. So let me give you a couple examples. First example is here in Belize. This is my friend Israel, who works for the government, and he's sitting with a fisherman and his granddaughter. And he's spent a few 15, maybe 20 minutes talking with this fisherman, describing the marine spatial planning process that's underway in Belize. And after a while, once he's gained his trust, he asks him to point to a map and indicate where he fishes, the gear types he uses, the species he targets. So the fisherman isn't operating the tool himself. Israel is operating SeaSketch on his computer or tablet. But the fisherman is introduced to this idea of marine spatial planning, which likely he hasn't heard about yet. So this is the first time he's heard about marine spatial planning. His values, the areas that he values, are captured into the tool, and he's left with an understanding of, okay, this is where marine spatial planning is going. This is how my data, my information is going to be used, and I'm going to be engaged in the future, if I want, in seeing the results of this survey exercise and potentially involved in the planning process itself. So on the left here, we're just looking at the resulting heat map that came from interviewing over 2,300 people. This is actually a planning or a survey that's being replicated to gather additional information now, but it began last year. Here's another example. Pictured here is my friend Nash. She's actually showing a woman who is part of the tourism industry how to use the tool itself, the survey tool itself. So Nash will show her, fire up the tool. It's a web-based tool. And ultimately, this woman who's involved in the tourism industry will use SeaSketch to draw polygons herself and indicate places that are important for tourism. The nice thing about this particular style of using the tool is that research shows when someone operates the tool themselves, they have an even greater sense of buy-in. They have a greater understanding of what the process is all about. In some cases, they begin to understand the science behind planning just by operating the tool themselves. So you can do facilitated surveys where facilitators are operating the tool. You can have surveys like this where the individuals are operating the tool themselves. There's some advantages. Either way, they're contributing to these data sets like the one on the left there, which is showing the distribution of artisanal fishing around the Maldives. So in this case, over 2,500 people are represented in the survey, and you can probably see, just sort of squint, that some of these polygons people are drawing are really, really small. In some places like the Maldives, people are really intimately familiar with the ocean space, and they can draw polygons around reefs that they use for different purposes. In any case, these data become really, really important in marine planning. Here's a group of people that I worked with in Fiji this past summer. Most of these people had no experience at all with any kind of mapping tools like GIS. But over the course of a couple days, they learned how to use SeaSketch, and then we went out in the field and met with folks in villages. This is Navakabu, and the guy on the right there, David, he just learned how to use SeaSketch 2 days prior, learned about marine spatial planning, and then he found himself sitting with the chief and asking him to indicate places of cultural importance around the village and the coastal areas around the village. So it's not a complicated tool to learn. Probably more complicated than the tool itself is just understanding what marine spatial planning is all about. So training a group like this involves sort of articulating what that is, so that when they go out in the field, they can convey what it is that they're doing. So Fiji is kind of a nice use case because so we're looking at this survey tool here. It's in English and it's in Fijian. So this is just an example of how you can configure SeaSketch, whether it's surveys or otherwise, to be in multiple languages. Any language that you choose. The interface can be auto-translated in some cases, and then the content, like the questions that we're looking at here, need to be translated by the person who develops the survey tool. But that's a nice feature, and it can also, surveys can also actually be configured to be used offline. So in places like Fiji, where it's quite common to not have great internet access or none at all, SeaSketch can actually be configured to be used offline, and then once the tool is brought online, all the data that are collected in these surveys can be synced up to the master database over the web. So the data that come out of the surveys can be used in a bunch of different ways. So they're heat maps, again, that show the distribution of valued places. Those can be used to visualize places of importance. They can be fed into prioritization models, for example, a cost layer and something like Marxan or Prioritize-R, or they can be used in SeaSketch itself to then sketch and evaluate plans. So this is a major feature that is sort of separate from surveys, but you can combine them if you want. This is the planning tool where using just simple drawing tools, one can sketch a zone and then evaluate that zone with reports, right? Reports that say, for example, the one on the right there is a report that shows the value of that zone that I've drawn on the west from the perspective of habitat protection and from the perspective of fisheries value, right? And there's different ways you can represent that or think about that. But These reports can be used to evaluate the trade-offs between various designs. Different kinds of reports include things like overlap with habitats, overlap with human uses. The human uses data could come from a survey, like the ones I just showed you. They could also come from things like Global Fishing Watch data, right? All these reports can use any kind of spatial data, but they are bespoke to a different project. So here we're looking at a project in Micronesia, and those reports on the right were written in JavaScript using an open API. And I'll get back to that in just a second, but that is probably the most complicated thing about developing a SeaSketch project, is developing those reports. Everything else is very simple. Another feature of the planning tool, like we're looking at here, is forums. And forums are these either public or private places where people can send messages, attach documents, and attach plans that they've drawn. So on the left here, there's a plan that includes 5 offshore marine protected area designs. And a guy named Anthony posted it back on January 25th of 2023. And other users who have access to this forum, this MSP working group forum, can run reports on that design that Anthony posted. They can copy that design, make modifications to their copy, and share it back into the forum. So these forums become a collaboration tool where people can ultimately collaborate on developing a plan for marine protection or otherwise. And the nice thing about these forums is they become sort of something like a paper trail for decision makers to ultimately understand how plans were designed and who is involved in them. So I really like that feature. So this participatory mapping approach, both in terms of surveys and in terms of the planning tool that stakeholders with little or no technical expertise can use to develop plans, this approach turns out to be really effective. And there are lots of good examples of how plans have been developed by stakeholders, how surveys have been conducted to capture people's values and interests that have led to plans that are signed into law. And here's just a handful of ones that I've been involved in. California's MPA network, 128 MPAs signed into law, 16% of the nearshore area protected, half of those are no-take zones. All of them were designed by stakeholders in Marine Map, which was the predecessor to SeaSketch. Same thing in Barbuda. There's a comprehensive marine plan that was developed there and signed into law in 2014. Those plans were developed by stakeholders. A great new example is the one in the Azores, which covers 30% of their offshore area, so 6 to 200 nautical miles, 30% protected, 15% is no-take. The other is highly protected. Again, these are plans that were developed in SeaSketch by stakeholders. So this participatory planning approach really, really does work. And there's some spectacular examples out there. So why, in a nutshell, why did we develop SeaSketch, and why do we continue to use it? Well, first, especially with those surveys, it's a great way to socialize the planning process, right? So to sit down with people with a map and capture their values into a database which shows where they go and how they use ocean space. That process is great in terms of just getting the word out about what's happening. We really don't want to have those situations like we just had in Brazil, where people are kind of caught by surprise and showing up to a meeting where there's a plan, never having heard about this planning process. That's when people get really upset. So by starting out and asking people, where do you go? How do you value ocean space in different ways? You have a chance to say, here's what's going on. And if you want to be involved in this process, here's how you can be involved. And we're going to use your data, your information in this process to ensure that your values are represented. So you're creating essential data, of course, in an area where typically data are lacking, in that nearshore area, information about human uses. obviously those surveys are really important. And so by gathering the data and by socializing MSP and getting people involved early in the process with these mapping tools, you're really generating buy-in that's crucial to the success of a process. So let me just tell you about the features briefly, and if we want during Q&A, I can dive into some of these. But in short, this is a web mapping service. Okay, it's a software service. Anybody can go to seasketch.org and create an account and create a project like the ones I was just showing you. So survey tools and planning tools. It's entirely free and open source. First and foremost, perhaps it's a geoportal where you can, as an administrator, drag and drop data in the format of, say, vector or raster files, shape files, GeoJSON, GeoTIFFs, and so on, and then using cartographic tools, style them. You can version your data, so upload multiple versions and track those. You can develop your geoportal to consume map services that are hosted elsewhere. So right now it's just Esri map services, but in the future we'll probably add WMS. So it's a really rich tool that you can very quickly develop a geoportal for visualizing, sharing data and associated metadata. So it's a survey tool, like you can develop any number of surveys that you want. There's a graphical user interface that I can show you in just a sec that makes it very easy to develop these surveys. Technically, there's no programming involved. And then you can use those tools to develop heat maps. The heat maps are generated offline. That is not something that SeaSketch does for you. But then you can add your heat maps back to a project and use it for planning. So and then the planning tool, again, pretty easy to develop. There's graphical tools that allow you to create these things we call sketch classes, which are just the things that people are drawing and analyzing. Those can be points, lines, and polygons. What's tricky is the report. So that report on the right there that shows trade-offs, that was written in JavaScript. There's an open API on GitHub, and I'll provide that link later, that JavaScript developers can use to create their own bespoke reports, and that's been done independent of folks of my lab. JavaScript developers out there have created reports, but I will say it's not easy, and we're trying to make that easier, so I'll tell you about that in just a second. The collaboration tools, these forums, are super easy to create. You can create any number of forums that are, as I said earlier, public or private. You can have forums like this one where MSP working groups members can post to the forum, but members of the public can't post. They can read the forum, they can track what's going on in the planning process, but members of the public can't post. All that stuff is really easy to set up as an administrator of a project. So I would encourage anybody on the call to just go to seasketch.org, create a new project, you give it a name, you designate a URL, and then you're off to the races. There's very good documentation online that you can use to guide the development of your project. But I think a lot of it is intuitive enough that you don't even need documentation. You can just kind of play around and create your own project very, very easily. So as I said, there's this graphical interface, or what we're looking at here is the admin interface for I guess this is the Blue Azores Ocean Use Survey. And you can add all kinds of questions, demographic questions, multiple choice questions. The kind of the special thing about SeaSketch as a survey tool is that you can ask people, area or place-based questions and ask them to draw points, lines, and polygons that are then used to create a database of spatial information. As I said, like every part of SeaSketch, I think, is super easy to learn and figure out how to do in terms of building a project. The one thing that is not easy is those reports. So what we're doing in 2025 is we're going to be developing a simple report builder. So you don't need to use JavaScript. You don't have to know JavaScript. You can just basically upload data sets and choose from simple choices to create reports like the one we're looking at on the right. Okay, where you're analyzing an MPA or zone of any kind using data that you've provided through the admin interface. So that's coming in 2025, and I'm pretty excited about that. So I'm going to stop there. I whipped through a lot of this, and I'm happy to focus on any or all of the topics that folks online are curious about. I also want to just extend the invitation to give smaller talks or just meet with any of you one-on-one over Zoom. It's easy for me to just kind of work with you if you're thinking about using SeaSketch for any given purpose. I can easily jump online and help you get started if that's of interest to you. Also, just as I said, there's a bunch of links in this presentation. Deborah shared that link to my presentation, so feel free to just access SeaSketch and play around. I'll stop there and entertain any questions.
Thank you very much, Will. Yeah, of course, it's always a pleasure to hear you and all your expertise. I've been running several projects in SeaSketch myself, so I can ensure that it's quite intuitive, and Will and his team are always available to help whenever they have time, busy schedule. But yeah, it's a really interesting tool. We have some questions, but I will encourage all the audience to type your questions on Q&A box, or if you are listening on YouTube, you can write it there in the comments and we will transfer to here. So we have some questions. I will start with a question from Elizabeth Baden. She asked, does this tool comply with the international human rights requirement for infrastructure projects? If yes, which standards? So if you could elaborate a little bit.
Well, that's such a great question. And I would say that we have not deliberately tried to meet those standards. So it is being used kind of all over the world. I think there are over 900 projects. I was just looking at that this morning. And they are being used in lots of different countries. But does it meet those international standards? I don't think so. We have not deliberately done that. So if you have experience making web applications that do that, I would love to hear about it.
Thank you. I can say one of the projects that I've been involved, we passed it to the ethical committee inside the University of the Azores. So usually what we do is it's each one that are developing the project in your own country, follow the rules of your accomplished. So yeah, that's the way to go.
Thank you. Yep.
I have another question from Rihanna Juans. This is amazing too, and I would like to know if the data it's tool it's up to date. So is there any? And she also asked, is there any training session?
Yeah. So the first question is about are the data up to date? Is that right, Deborah?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the data are as up to date as administrators keep them. I should say that in the case where people are displaying data that are map services, those are kept up to date sort of automatically. So here we're looking at this is data coming from, just look at the metadata so I get it right. It's coming from NOAA Coral Reef Watch, which is daily global 5-kilometer coral bleaching hotspots. And so this is data that's coming, directly from NOAA. It's not sitting in SeaSketch. SeaSketch is just calling this map service. So in that case, yeah, these data are up to date. But a lot of these other data, like this one that was uploaded by one of the administrators, that was uploaded back in August of 2023, excuse me. So Has this data been updated? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. So the data can get out of date. It just depends on who's added the data and who's added, and if the data are map services that are updated regularly. So the other question, sorry, Deborah, what was the second part of that question?
If we do have any training sessions.
Yeah. So I do a lot of training sessions, and usually they're targeted to a group of users that are going to be, doing surveys like that group that you saw in Fiji, right? Where I train them up on doing surveys and we tweak the survey together. Oftentimes I'll do a training with a group of people who are going to be responsible for doing the marine spatial planning. So folks in Belize, for example, or folks in California where they're doing planning. I will do a training specifically for them. We don't have any online training that's just kind of generic because the tool is really used differently in different places. But if you're interested in the training and you have a group of people that you would like to receive a bit of training, please reach out to me and we can just talk about, the scale at which you want to learn this stuff. Maybe there's a 1 hour training that I can just do for you over Zoom, or maybe there's an in-person training that I can provide over the course of 5 days, something like that.
Okay, thank you, Will. I have another question. Can project be made confidential and be open only to invited members or selected administrative approval? And the
Yeah,
second part of the question is the projects, or will all projects be visible in the platform to all users?
right. Thanks for that question. So when you create a project, so here we're looking at the admin interface for my particular project. It's seasketch.org/will, and I've made it visible to the public. But when I create my project, I can make it visible to administrators only or by invitation only, right? So in that case, and I can make it publicly listed or not. So that the tools for making it public, private, or publicly listed are very, very simple and yeah, made available to admins.
Yeah, thank you, Will. And there are a question asking if from Christian Nagu, if is Nigeria represented in SeaSketch, and if not, how they can participate and generate participation.
Uh-huh. I don't think there is a project in Nigeria. I'm not sure. And this is a real shortcoming of SeaSketch for now. I swear we'll make this better in the future. Right now, if you go to seasketch.org, all the projects that are publicly listed, actually, in this case, I'm seeing all of the projects, whether they're public or not, because I'm a super user. But if you go here and go to seasketch.org/projects, you'll see all of the projects listed. There is no map to just see where all these projects are. If you were familiar with the previous version of SeaSketch, there was such a map where you could just look at a map of the globe and see whether there was something in a particular geographic location. In this case, there's just no way of really knowing. As far as I know, there is no such project in Nigeria. So if you wanted to create one, you could just go to, you know, seasketch.org, click Get Started, and then create a project called Nigeria, right? And then give it a URL, create the project, and then invite people to the project. Keep it public, keep it private, whatever your preference.
Great. Yeah, there are several questions still on database. Which existing MSP and data tools do you incorporate it automatically or not? And if people are willing to publish their biodiversity data that are on another platform, how can we ensure data accuracy and reliability?
Yeah, so there's a lot there.
Yeah.
So, geez, remind me the first part of that question, Deborah.
Those existing MSP and data tools or observatories, how can we
Gotcha.
link it?
Gotcha. So there's in a given project, let's take a look at mine again, my little sandbox. These layers are a combination of data that are coming from other platforms and data that I've just uploaded. So I showed you the data that's coming streaming live from NOAA, right, on coral bleaching. There are other data providers out there, like, let's see, Protected Seas or Protected Planet, that shows sort of not biodiversity data, but boundaries for MPAs. Some of those data can be pulled in dynamically. But there are other like data providers, big, really helpful data providers like Global Fishing Watch's data that have to be, for now, downloaded from their site and then uploaded manually to SeaSketch. In the future, probably this year, we'll add the Global Fishing Watch as a part of our data library. Currently, if I want to add something from currently there's only this one data set, this NOAA Coral Reef Watch data that is part of our data library, but this will grow to include data that are coming from Global Fishing Watch or perhaps Allen Coral Atlas. But for others that are not part of our data library, you can either add them, pull them in as Esri services, vector tiles by URL, and remote GeoJSON. As far as like other MSP tools, we use them in concert with SeaSketch, but they're not really a part of SeaSketch. So for example, MarkSan or Prioritize R or trade-off modeling tools, cumulative impact modeling. Those are tools that we use alongside SeaSketch, and then SeaSketch is used to display the results of those kinds of modeling tools, but you don't do the modeling itself in SeaSketch. So hopefully that's answering part of your question anyway. Was there other parts of the question, Deborah, that I missed?
No, I think you covered because you answer both in only one.
Okay.
There are one question that asks the opposite way. Can this be downloaded as standalone on system and synchronized online later?
So it's a great question, and it's kind of complicated. In short, this is a software service that it's a web-based tool, right? So the planning tool must be used when connected to the internet. It cannot be downloaded and used offline. The survey tool, the answer is a little bit more complicated. For those that are members of the Blue Prosperity Coalition, which is just a group of people that are doing marine planning and other kinds of stuff, we can develop the survey tool so that it can be used offline. Basically, you just configure it so that the maps that the survey tool are using are actually situated on the computer, along with the mapping application that you've developed for the survey. Those things can be used offline, and then when you're online, the data are synced up to the web-based database. But so that is a feature limited to, unfortunately, for now, the Blue Prosperity Coalition, and that just has to do with a agreement we have with Mapbox, who's the author of these base maps. We will create our own base maps in the future, in which case that offline capability will be completely open and free for anybody to use. But for now, it's a limited feature for the Blue Prosperity Coalition.
Yeah, thank you very much, Will. It's really exciting to see that each year SeaSketch has been improving and improving. So yeah, looking forward for the future. And there are a different type of question, but really interesting one. Could you please explain how these results could promote gender-smart maritime spatial planning?
That's a great one. So when we do these surveys, if we ask people questions about their gender, then we can disaggregate the data based on gender. So I'm wondering if this is a leading question because it's something that I'm very interested in, and that we've been working on a paper with a number of us who've done these surveys. If you break out the survey results that you've gathered, asking people where they go and how they use ocean space, if you break it out by gender, then you can ask questions about how the genders are using ocean space differently. So let's look at commercial fishing, for example. So this is a heat map that shows the distribution of commercial fishing. That's not the one I want to show you. Is it this one? It's not the one I want to show you either. Let me see if I can find it in a different project. So give me a moment. Search for this. Well, I'm sorry, I'm fumbling here. In short, we found some really interesting patterns. Maybe some that are not surprising, some that are kind of surprising. One thing is that if you compare the shapes that have been drawn by men and women, the women tend to value spaces that are near shore, and men tend to value places that are more offshore. Men tend to draw bigger spaces, women smaller places. So you can immediately ascertain from that if you're um, restricting how people use ocean space in the near shore, you're going to disproportionately affect women. And there are some really kind of interesting things that occur around places like this, and I really wish I could find that heat map that shows this. But if you look at where women are valuing space around this island, Santa Maria in the Azores, they are first really distinct from where men tend to value the space. Women value spaces for recreational fishing in areas that are outside of MPAs, whereas men tend to value areas that are both inside and outside MPAs for recreational fishing. And there are different reasons for this, but again, when you're zoning, if you create a new marine protection in some area, you might disproportionately affect women and men. So these data turn out to be really, really useful for planning in that way.
Thank you. It's really interesting to see how we can get and how different answers we can obtain from these sketches. We do have another question from technical aspects. Would SeaSketch use OBIS or GBIF data? And can you give your view of how people would benefit from standardized biodiversity datasets? Alternatively, can people willing to be publishing their biodiversity data to so like OBIS? And I will add a third question to that. Is there any place where people can find what type of data they can upload and a more comprehensive explanation that they can look after the webinar? Thanks.
Yes. Yeah, thanks for that question. So in short, the link should be in the PowerPoint that's shared with you. But if you go to docs.seasketch.org, there's an admin guide and a user guide. And the admin guide, if you go to overlay layers and read up on uploading spatial data, this will tell you what kinds of data you can use specifically and how to treat them once they're in SeaSketch. As far as using OBIS data, so if the data are spatial, if they are in the format of points, lines, and polygons, they can be used in SeaSketch. There's no dynamic link between SeaSketch and OBIS, so you'd have to download specific data sets, and then save them as, if they're vectors, as reshape files, GeoJSON or flat GeoBuff. If they're raster data, GeoTIFFs and NetCDF. And that's a growing list of supported data types. But yeah, in short, you'd have to export the data from OBIS. Are there good examples of that? I haven't done it myself much, but I do believe some of the data that are in the Blue Azores project came from OBIS. I'm just kind of looking through here to see if I can find them really quickly. And I'm not sure where these, I can't. Maybe some of these. these data sets that show distribution of bird species came from OBIS. I'm not sure. So, I'm probably making it obvious because I don't really know the answer to this question. I don't often have a real connection to the data that people are putting into these. So there's over 900 projects out there. And I'm guessing one of those projects has some data that were extracted from OBIS, but I don't know about them because I'm only involved in a handful of the projects in SeaSketch.
Yeah, thank you very much, Will. We do have another question. Is it useful for MPA networks or only working with a single isolated MPA design? So can we elaborate on possible marine corridors, for example?
Yeah, for sure. So it's, if you just boil it down to its simplest form, it's a tool for spatial planning, and you can those spatial plans can be any kind of polygon, point, or line. We've used it for developing single MPAs, for developing MPA networks like the one in California, or like the one in the Azores, and we've used it for developing comprehensive plans that include other zone types, like in Barbuda, where we had a little shipping lane, some mooring and anchorage zones, and so on. So if you can conceive of developing a spatial plan which has points, lines, or polygons, SeaSketch can be used to do that. Currently, some of the bigger projects like here in California, where we're reevaluating those plans that I showed that were developed in 2004 to 2011. Now those plans are being examined, and it's they're kind of reconsidering, what do we do with this network of MPAs? Do any of these plans need to be eliminated or expanded and to essentially enhance connectivity? So there's a kind of a nice spacing report in this particular project that shows how or whether the plans in this network of MPAs are connected in terms of various habitats, right? So this is showing us that all these there's good connectivity for beach habitat replicates in this MPA network. If you look at sort of connectivity for other habitat types like eelgrass, there's poor connectivity. So here's a report that's telling us essentially how far apart various replicates of protected habitats are from each other, and whether or not that meets guidelines for connectivity.
That's
Hopefully that
really
answers.
interesting. Yeah, sure. Sure it does. Yeah, there are another, the co-design process, it's really critical for success, and there are a rush and a push to define some 30% area of conservation goals. So how can the two things become more effective? Stakeholder engagement and this rush to do conservation. And I add to that, for your experience, so what are the most effective ways to engage and have the input from local communities?
Wow, such a great question, and I feel like we could spend 3 hours on that. But
We do have 10
that,
minutes.
well, it's coming from obviously a very informed individual, because there is real tension between this co-design process and expediency, right? We want to move as quickly as possible because we have these goals of achieving 30% protection by 2030. But in fact, to do that, we really do need to engage stakeholders. And so how do you do that? You have to have a well supported, both financially and otherwise, process that is very committed to stakeholder engagement. And I don't think that there are a whole lot of shortcuts. I mean, the good news is that, putting together a planning tool like this used to take a year, and now you can do it in days, or maybe weeks. So that part is quick, but you've got to sit down with people and have them, at the very least, be a part of a conversation where they're saying, here's where I want the MPA to be, draw it here. And at best, they're actually given the tool in a room with other stakeholders where they can draw their own plans, share them in forums, and really concretely express their ideas for where these things should go. So that is, in my experience, that experience of being invited to a room where I can either talk or actually manipulate the tool, that experience is critical to success. And it takes time and resources. So I don't have any real good examples of where there wasn't a in-person forum, right, where it was just completely web-based and stakeholders were given these tools and opportunities to speak online, where that led to the success of these new MPAs. In every case that I was involved in, it really required stakeholder groups sitting with each other, negotiating face to face to generate these plans, and that just takes time. And I know that's not good news because we're all in a hurry.
Yeah, no, but I think that's the thing. We need the resources and time if we want to do a great stakeholder engagement, that's for sure.
Yep.
We do have two more questions. If we squeeze, we can manage. Are there any possibility of incorporating SeaSketch into the current MSP visual board game? And are there any plans to train through online media interesting used in Ghana, West Africa, or others?
So in terms of like the MSP challenge board game, I don't think that there's, I mean, one could conceive of how you could incorporate that. We don't have plans to. It's kind of it's a different beast. But there is this project called Bakul, right, which is a fictitious place in the world. And this Bakul project is used in the blue planning and practice training package. And this is used in lots of different places. It's actually in, let me just use my fancy. So it's in French. So you can see this is in French now. I can choose the French base map. This is in French. It's in Spanish. What are the languages here? French, Spanish, Portuguese, and English. So this is a tool, a project in SeaSketch that is a tool for doing MSP training. And if you're interested in this training, if you're interested in this tool, please reach out to me and I can put you in touch with the trainers that use this tool. It's been used a lot in lots of different places, but where it's been used exactly, I couldn't tell you. Maybe Deborah, you know.
Yeah, they are based in Arendal, but yeah, they made several projects here and there. I've been part of some of them, and it's a really brilliant workshop and training. We do have more 6 minutes, so we can go to the last question. There are any differences between men and women's parenting priorities, which is really interesting. So the Kate Rose ask, has there any been a formal analysis of that?
Yes, and I would love to share with you a preprint. We've just submitted an article for review in Marine Policy, where we've done a formal analysis of the differences in priorities or interests and values in men and women based on these ocean use surveys. Otherwise, I don't know if I think there are other analyses out there that I'm just not all that familiar with. But as far as the work we've been doing, there's going to be a paper hopefully coming out in Marine Policy next year that I can share with you.
Nice, so nice to hear that. Then we don't have any other question. If someone want to drop the list one. Otherwise, I do have one. How do you believe that SeaSketch can contribute not only to the planning of the areas, but also on monitoring and evaluation already proposed marine protected area?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question, and I think that I have two answers to that. First, monitoring data is often, sort of data that you want to examine trends with, right? Like, so let's say abundance of fish or abundance of invertebrates inside and outside marine protected areas to understand how things are changing inside and outside MPAs. That kind of monitoring data isn't really appropriate for SeaSketch. For coral, reef monitoring data, there's tools like Mermaid. There's, other, I think, appropriate tools for that. SeaSketch is really, I think, most useful in the planning phase, so not in the monitoring phase. The exception to that would be that ocean use data. So if you want to examine how ocean uses and values are changing over time in response to your plan, then you can continually use that survey tool to ask those questions and see how people's sense of place is changing. So one of the things I'm really excited about is using that sense of place data, especially over time with repeated surveys, in the context of ocean health, the Ocean Health Index. So again, like getting a sense of whether or not people's sense of place and places they value are increasing in health over time or not. So that's I guess the exception is those ocean use survey data can be really, I think, useful in monitoring.
That's really insightful. Thank you very, very much, Will. I think it was a really enlightening session, and I learned a lot as usual with you. So yeah, I want to thank every participant attending online. And yeah, if you want to give your final remarks, you still have 2 minutes too.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for attending. I really appreciated those insightful questions. Hopefully, I answered most of them. Please do reach out to me, and like I said earlier, I'm really happy to jump on Zoom and discuss any of these tools or my experience with using them for anybody who's interested. So, thank you so much, Deborah, and thanks everybody
Thank you. Thank you. And the session were recorded, so if you missed it, you can certainly watch the entire package later. Bye-bye.
Bye. Cool.
Great, on time.
Yeah.
Yeah. We still have some people here.